Hello, everybody. Greetings, salutations, and welcome to another adventure in history. History. I hope everybody is doing well, and I hope that today has treated you pretty well, as good as it can be. Not everything is always as good as it can be, but I hope that it is as good as it can be. What's up, Lumpy? Hope you're doing well, my friend. I hope that the chemistries are treating you politely at work. Congratulations on getting a raise. That's good news, but also boo for people trying to dump more work on you. But I hope things turn out for the best, as they should for people that are as dedicated and kind as you are. So I hope that all smooths out. Today was okay, but tomorrow promises to be a human resources Shakespearean play. Well, I hope it's more of a comedy. Perhaps more of a Midsummer Night's Dream, as opposed to like a Titus Andronicus or or a Tempest. I hope that you get one of the good Shakespeare plays. Good here not being a relative description of their quality, but good here meaning like they have smiley endings at the end, right? Not like, and everybody died and it was horrible. Yeah. Not all of the Shakespeare plays turn out well. But I anytime, HR is involved, it's a thing. Hey, Kyle, what's up? Hope you're doing well. Hope your day's treating you well. I need to catch up with you and see what's been going on since you got off. I know that you had meals yesterday with some of the dojo people. That looked pretty cool, but hope you're doing well. And I hope things are treating you well. And I hope that you're doing some good works and finding lots of people that are going to give you money. Let's see. Yeah, so it is viewer request night. Now, I know that we did a viewer request last week. And apparently something has disturbed Kaylee, and she is now barking somewhere up there. You are betting for 1 to 2 people to quit on the spot after an emergency meeting the higher-ups are doing to explain how they... Ooh, no. Oh, no. That sounds like a no-no. I don't like those. I don't like those at all. Lumpy, I hope that you are not one of the 2 of those people thinking about quitting. But if you are, I understand. Anyway, so we are doing a viewer request stream in a back-to-back week, and we're actually going to go do another one next week. So it's kind of a rare situation where we get multiple of these strung in a row. It is, of course, summertime for me, and I'm on summer break, so I do have more time to prep streams and all of that stuff. So it's not really that big of an idea. I actually, prior to the summer starting, I had considered trying to do a viewer request every single week. But with the amount of travel that I had planned, with both going to Turkey and then going to North Carolina on vacation, and then other stuff that I've got planned for the rest of the summer, I didn't necessarily want to commit to doing something and then going, we're going to do it every week, except for all of these weeks. So, yeah. We'll just do them as frequently as I can, fit them into my schedule. And if you want to know what is upcoming, always welcome to join the Discord and hang out there and share memes and stuff about things that are going on in history and cool videos and just chat. But also on there, I have a channel where I try to keep up to date on the upcoming episodes. So if you want to see kind of what we're going to be doing in the next couple of weeks, you can always check out there. Sometimes I do get you not entertained, Steve Conley. Is this not why you are here? For those of you that are not already following my bud Steve Conley, you got to go give this guy a follow. He's a cool dude. He has a stream where he will sometimes be working on his webcomic, which is called The Middle Age, which is delightful. And sometimes, here recently, he's been working on sculpting three-dimensional stuff for minifigures that are going to be part of his now double stretch goal successful Kickstarter campaign. Also, as I told Steve I would do every time he raided, this raid brought to you by My Prancing Pony. Alcohol is magic. My Prancing Pony, Jabberwock free since 1082. This is the bar that is in the Middle Age, or the pub, I guess would be the correct the correct terminology there for it. So Steve was doing some sculpting today. What's up, Nate? Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. We've got Cave Geek on the way in. Dry Erase Girl, good to see you as well. Hope you're having a good one. I know Dry Erase Girl is having a good one because Steve's second stretch goal for his Kickstarter campaign unlocked a new mini, which is Waddle Bottom, the King of All Ducks. So that was something that many of us were excited about, but I know that on Steve's Discord, Dry Erase Girl had specifically been sharing some information about the expectation of Waddle Bottom. So, what's up, David? While the Kickstarter is for minis, you can yes, absolutely. You can pick up volumes 1 and 2 in hardcover format of The Middle Age. And if you haven't read it, I give it double thumbs up endorsement. It's really funny stuff. And you can get a bundle of all of that and the minis together and go support Steve. Is a well-deserved kind of guy that does good work and is a quality individual. And I can say that because I've met him and I've hung out in his room and I have a pretty good gauge on people. What's up, Illuminated Art? Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. Yeah, lots of friends. Hello, everybody. For those of you that might not know me, my name is Shane, and I am a college teacher. I teach history and sociology at college where I live down here in the Deep South. Woo, Deep South. And my show is a history stream. Sometimes I'll build models, and other times I'll sit here and talk about Tolkien for 2 hours. But usually you'll see me here on stream talking history, but we don't do it in a stuffy way. We have a good time and goof off and make bad puns and chase all the rabbits down into the side areas and end up talking about, whatever random thing ends up popping up. But tonight we're doing a very special viewer request. On Tuesdays, usually every other Tuesday, we do viewer requests that are chosen by members of the audience, including you. And this particular one is special because every year I do a special gift for my wife, whose birthday is in the month of June. And because of timing and us being gone on her actual birthday, I haven't gotten around to doing it yet, but she reminded me, hey, you owe me a stream. And I'm like, yes, I do. So this is a fulfillment as part of my wife's birthday gift. And she chose the Reconstruction era of the United States, which is something that we have been talking about between the two of us for quite some time, mostly because this is a period of time in the history of the United States that sets up a lot of later events and a lot of the social issues that are affecting the United States even today have roots that go all the way back to this period of Reconstruction and, of course, the Civil War before them. But it's during Reconstruction that a lot of the tactics that have been used, especially against people of color in the United States, that have been, used to keep them from voting, that have been used to keep them from running for office, a lot of those tactics were developed by people during this particular period of time of Reconstruction. We need sexier paleo talk topics. Lumpy, I will be 100% honest and say that there's not much more sexy than a curious person that is interested in learning and becoming better. That's pretty sexy to me. And in fact, just before the stream, I gave her a big hug and told her happy birthday again and thanked her for being curious and interested in learning and intelligent. That's a big deal. You could be a stellar knockout like my wife is, and if you are completely dumb and not interested, I'm not interested either. So my wife is smarter than I am and is also very kind and loving, and I married way up. Way up. So, yeah. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Reconstruction, and we'll start off with, as everyone knows that I love, a map. Woo! I love maps. I really, really do. So this is a map of the United States as it stood at the end of the Civil War. So we're not going to talk too terribly much about the Civil War itself. We're not going to go into the purposes or the meanings. We're going to just know that the Civil War started, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the very beginning. But I did want to show this, partially because I know that we have people that are not native to the United States. We have people that are from all over the world that come to hang out in the stream. So wanted to make sure that everybody has sort of a grasp on what exactly we're talking about here. So when the Civil War started, these states down here in green seceded from the United States, and they formed a new country that's called the Confederate States of America. And they were specifically basing a lot of this stuff around the concept of, well, everybody knows it, slavery. And yes, it was because of slavery, and it was because of states' rights too, but it was clearly the states' rights to own slavery. Dun 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 dun. Eric, thank you so much for that follow, and welcome to the adventure. It's good to see you. I recognize you from being a regular over in Steve's channel, and I hope you're having a great one. Foggage Green, good to see you, my friend. Hope you're having a good one as well. I'm trying to make sure that I didn't miss anybody. I'm trying to say hello to everybody that comes in, because I just feel like if you're going to spend time with me, you may as well hear me say your name at least once, right? Did I get everybody? I'm pretty sure I said hello to David, but hey, David, if I didn't say hey to you, hey to David. Hey, Vipers, as a British person, I believe it's my patriotic duty to say boo. Are you saying boo because there is a United States, or are you saying boo because the British had outlawed slavery by 1832? Or are you saying boo because the British came within a hair's breadth of actually opening regular negotiations and trade with the South? Which one are you saying boo to? If I don't know how much you are up on UK history, but I actually have some actual newspapers from London that date back to the 1860s. I have one of them from 1863 and one of them from 1864 that talk about how bad the panic is of cotton, especially in big cities that were relying on southern cotton to operate, places like Liverpool, places that were hurting pretty badly and trying to figure out where they're going to get cotton from, because that whole South thing about slavery, we can't in a good conscience necessarily continue to trade with them, can we? But the money. I'm digressing. I need to get back on topic. Anyway, so the pink states here are states that stayed in the Union, and these red states here and these red territories are ones that had slaves but did not secede. Also, Maryland did not secede. I'm not certain exactly why. It's not a disputed area, but Maryland had slaves but did not secede, mostly because it was not allowed to, because Abraham Lincoln effectively took that over and put it under military dictatorship. But this is the layout of the United States at the time of the end of the Civil War. Okay, so Of course, we know that at this point, I just mentioned him, and I don't know why I didn't show you his photo. This guy is the president at the time. This is Abraham Lincoln, who, of course, is going to be one of the more famous presidents in United States history. Some people say the best president. That is, of course, a debate for another day. Now, what's interesting here is that we have to have a bit of a discussion before we actually kick off the larger concept of what exactly the dates for the period of Reconstruction are. And there's a lot of different varyings of the dates. Some people say that the period of Reconstruction started as soon as the Union Army during the Civil War took over big chunks of territory from the South, right? So when the Union Army began to basically occupy large portions of Southern territory, this is the period that began Reconstruction. Other people say, no. It's only after the war ended that Reconstruction began. And then some people are like, no, it's not really until the Reconstruction Acts were passed that Reconstruction begins. And then on the other end, some people are like, okay, well, where does it end? Some people say, well, it really ends with the removal of Northern troops from the South. And some people go, no, it doesn't actually end until all of the Reconstruction era bills are repealed by the Supreme Court. So this even goes to like the 1880s, 1883 or so. And then some people are like, no, it doesn't end until all of the big bills that were designed to try to give voting rights and freedoms to the freed slaves ultimately failed. So this extends it all the way into the 1890s. So why is there such a big gap of time? So if we gave the minimum period of time to the maximum period of time, we could say that Reconstruction lasted from 1861 all the way until 1890, which is, a period of 29 years. But some people say, no, it's this sort of narrow period of time from 1865 to 1877. So it's only like 12 years of time. And there's a difference in the way that people interpret the dates of Reconstruction. And usually speaking, are you not entertained? Holy moly, Dr. WD-40 is in the house. Hello, everybody from Dr. WD-40 stream. And hey, Doc, good to see you. Hope that you're having a good one. Welcome, everybody. For those of you that might be in for the first time, hello and welcome. My name is Shane, and I teach history and sociology at college for a living down here in the south of the United States where I live. And dun 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 dun. Sienna, thank you so much for that follow, and welcome to the adventure. So what I do here on my stream is I talk about history stuff, but it's not the boring history that you might think of. I'm actually rather passionate about history, and I try to make things stories. And while I do mention dates, it's like the thing. Dun 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 dun. Rosie Dark, thank you so much for that follow, and welcome into the adventure. So we have lots of different topics, usually on Thursdays. Since I've started streaming a couple of years ago, we've been covering history in chronological order, and we started all the way back with what makes Homo sapiens Homo sapiens, and then we kind of going through history, and we've got up to what is the 7th century, so the year 600 to 700. So if you come back on this Thursday, you can hear us talk about a bunch of wars in Korea, where the three kingdoms of Korea are beating the mess out of each other, and then China gets involved, and it gets real nasty, and there's like assassinations and, running people out of the buildings and all that fun stuff. But on Tuesdays, we do viewer request streams, and this is a topic tonight of Reconstruction. That is part of a gift to my wife for her birthday. She gets to choose a topic, and then we get to talk about it. So just to be awkward, you're going to measure the length of the Reconstruction era in feet and inches. Because, that's what we do here in the United States. We don't like that metric system. So let me say hello to everybody. Late Bloomer, good to see you. I hope that you're having a good one. Eric, again, welcome in. Doc, thank you so much again for that raid. For those of you that don't know Dr. WD-40, he is one of the founding members of the Knowledge Fellowship, which is a group that I'm a part of. You can click the link there and chat for more information. Knowledge Fellowship, of course, is a group of educational streamers that try to make the world a little bit better by giving away free information in a way that's accessible to people, because knowledge makes the world better. It really seriously does. And if we understand things that happened in the past in a more comprehensive way, and a way that is maybe challenges some of our biases regardless of which particular side of the issue that we're on, we get a fuller view of what's actually happening in the past, that might help us discuss things in the present. So there you go. No Fear, what's up? Good to see you. Hope you're having a great one. Tropical, good to see you in. Hope the world is going well for you. KP, my friend, good to see you. Ice Allen, hello, and welcome. Good to see you. Vipers is here. We've got Dodo Obo. Homo sapiens are so overrated. I mean, we call ourselves wise, but are we really? I like to think that we have something going for us that was a little bit different than some of the other hominids that were running around at the time. Ironically, I was just reading a book that's called Sapiens, and the premise there is that one of the things that made Homo sapiens more adaptable is actually that we're kind of dumb in a way, that we had a moment in our mental and perhaps even brain chemistry situation. Let me pause here. Dun 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 dun. Alice, thank you so much for that follow, and welcome into the adventure. So the change was that we could believe in stuff that didn't exist, which is actually kind of dumb if you look at it logically speaking. But when you apply that to things like sociology and the concept of living in a community where you have mutual trust, even with individuals that you don't know very well, yeah, that's kind of like, it's kind of a dumb thing if you just look at it logically, because you got to know that they're going to do something eventually that's going to mess you over, right? But we do it anyway. That's what makes us so successful. And we have all of the people that are like, hey, look, I bet I could chase that mammoth and it would die. And they're like, Jimmy, don't chase the mammoth. Dude, dude, Jimmy, don't chase the mammoth. And Jimmy's like, oh, I'm going to chase it. And they're like, there goes Jimmy. We're never going to see him again. He's going to go run off and chase this mammoth and get mauled. And then like 2 days later, he comes back carrying all of this mammoth stuff. And he's like, dude, I totally killed that mammoth. Like, it turns out that they can't actually run as fast as we can or as long as we can. And I just like chased them to the point that their hearts exploded. And so you guys need to come back and help me carry all this mammoth back home, because I can't carry all of it. And that's how society kind of functions, right? People are like, hey, I've got this idea like freedom, and we should totally give everybody freedom. Like, everybody freedom. And then there's a whole war over it. And then people are like, I don't like that. And then other people are like, but we gotta. And this is what Reconstruction is, right? People are idiots. Sometimes. That's what happens when you get to name yourself. Yeah, you name yourself the wisest thing possible, right? Like, imagine if humans had named ourselves like Homo Moronus, right? Like, we are idiots. I believe in things that don't exist, and I believe in myself, which unfortunately does. Oh, vipers, that's not cool. Dude, I totally killed that mammoth. Hashtag all this mammoth. So, for all of you that are new here to the stream, feel free to participate at whatever level you would feel comfortable with. We're really, really laid back here. I enjoy laughing. It's a good time. I am not Professor Binns from Harry Potter. History doesn't have to be super boring. It's just a whole bunch of people making decisions, and that's the same kind of stuff that we do right now, right? So I missed a couple of questions prior to the big raid, so let me roll back. You're curious about Oklahoma now. There was a ruling back in 2020 that a huge portion of it is reservation, marked Indian Territory on the map. Yes, correct. So if we go back to our map here, of course, the original territory here that was set aside for Native Americans during the Indian Removal Act under Andrew Jackson was not originally supposed to be a state. It was supposed to be left designated as reservation territory for Native Americans. Now, that changed over time, especially as people other than Native Americans moved out there, and especially as the westward expansion movement is going to pick up and really start pushing stuff. So you can see here that Kansas is already a state and Texas is already a state. There are going to be people moving through this area almost immediately upon it being designated as, a territory of the United States. Of course, this is part of Louisiana Purchase. But the idea here is when the state itself applied for statehood, there's a bit of a question as to actually who owned the land. The land itself had been designated as tribal land, and then it was not designated as tribal land, and then it was allowed to enter the Union as a state, and supposed to have worked all of those differences out with recompensation for land that was taken away from tribal territory. But the particular question is, what particular legal document supersedes the other? So if the original treaties signed by Native American tribes and the United States that effectively removed them from territory that was east of the Mississippi River and moved them to designated spots within what is modern day Oklahoma, if those are the documents that take legal precedence, all subsequent legal documents should therefore be null and void. And the question is whether or not subsequent documents that were made between the state of Oklahoma and Native American tribal peoples and individuals who purchased land from tribal peoples, whether or not those are going to then be honored as opposed to the original documentation. And it's very, very muddy. And of course, the United States government is involved with this directly because the government does not particularly have a positive track record with dealing with Native Americans. In fact, if you look at almost all of the legal things that have come out, in the past 100 years or so, Native Americans are almost unilaterally going to get turned down, defeated, stalled out, wrapped up in red tape, or just told no. And it's kind of messy. Does marching to the sea count as Reconstruction? We'll actually talk about William Tecumseh Sherman in just a bit. Eric asks, is this a period where Lincoln embarked on his vampire hunting career? Yes. As denoted by the factually accurate and 100% historically documentary-ish movie Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. So if you've seen that movie, that is exactly how it happened. It's one of the most historically accurate movies I've ever seen. Of course, I'm joking, but you gotta have a laugh every now and then, right? Dun-dun-dun-dun. Get off my lawn, you carpetbagger. Yeah, that's a big one. We'll talk about carpetbaggers here in just a second. Okie dokie. Dun-dun-dun-dun. Manifest destiny, indeed. If I lived in the West, I'd start running the trails east and screaming like something is chasing me just to freak out new settlers. Yeah, that's something that I could totally see myself doing as well. Anyway, so let's kind of get back on track. We're talking about Lincoln and what he's up to, and we were talking a little bit about the actual dates of Reconstruction, when it started and when it ended. And one of the things that we're trying to talk about with these differings in reckonings, right? We're trying to figure out when it started. Did it start immediately upon occupation of Southern territory by the Union Army during the Civil War? Or did it start later? Or did it end at a certain point, or blah, blah, blah? All of this is going to be under a larger umbrella of how you as an individual are likely to interpret Reconstruction. There is a whole array of interpretations for this. There are, of course, people that think Reconstruction was legitimate, and there are people who think that Reconstruction did not do enough. There are people who thought that Reconstruction was illegitimate, but it was mostly fair. There are people that think that Reconstruction was an attempt at destroying the glorious Southern way of life. And every aspect in between, and even more that are on the outside. Of course, there are some people that are just, going to be on the what we might call conspiracy theory fringes of both sides of the argument with any argument, right? Find out here in Indiana, I drive on a number of roads that are marked as having been part of the Potawatomi Trail of Death. That's very unfortunate. Weird fact about Indiana. Indiana today has the highest number of KKK membership per capita of any state in the Union. So, interesting there. Not saying anything about you as an individual, Foggage. And it's just a weird thing that I picked up along the way. The YouTube channel History Buffs, which assesses the historical accuracy of movies and television, has a great breakdown of how Native Americans have been repeatedly screwed over right up to the Dakota Access Pipeline protest and their Dances with Wolves episode. Thanks, Vipers. I've never particularly seen that episode. Fun fact, yeah, Metranda took a little bit of a justice or liberty with that particular description as a fun fact. More KKK in Indiana than Florida, yes. What's up, Shamanite? Also, hey, Metrand. Not the first time you brought that up. I'll try to think of another Indiana fact. Here's another Indiana fact. Vice President Mike Pence from Indiana, former governor of Indiana. Also home to the Indianapolis Colts, where Peyton Manning used to be quarterback. Peyton Manning holds the NFL record for most playoff losses by a starting quarterback. So there you go. There are 2 additional Indiana facts that I know. Okie doke. So, the dates are important. And what I want to do over the course of the rest of the discussion tonight is sort of talk about this stuff in a timeline. And I'm going to cover it in a timeline so that everybody sees when events happen, and then I will sort of allow you all to make your best judgments as to when you think Reconstruction started and when you think Reconstruction kind of ended. So let us start with 1861. Now, 1861, Lincoln is president. We're, of course, in the Civil War, and in 1861, the North is going to begin to attack into the South. There's going to be several invasions of the Confederate States of America by the Army of the United States, and of course, there are also invasions of the North by the Confederate States of America. And what's going to happen here is, along the period of time that they are doing so, the Union Army is going to encounter enslaved individuals. And it was official policy of the United States Army at this point, when they encountered individuals that were enslaved in the South, to take them effectively into protective custody. Now, what does that actually mean, though? What counted as protective custody for these people that might have been on a plantation in Northern Virginia or Kentucky or Missouri, these border states that had a lot of activity in the early part of the war? A lot of that was really just sort of turned into, we're going to take this territory that is maybe your plantation and we're going to post some soldiers here, and it would be really cool if you all could just sort of keep working the fields. Because one of the things that is going to be beneficial for the Union Army is to take some of this land that was in the Confederate States of America and use it to either fund or fuel their army, right? If they can take crops that are being grown in the South, send them to the North, and then sell them on the open market, that can help fund the war effort. If they can take territory in the South and grow food off of it, of course, that can help feed their troops and help fuel the war effort. And while this is not a strict, you are still enslaved situation, in the earliest parts of the war, a lot of these people that are slaves that are going to encounter the United States Army are going to either ask to join up in the military, like join the Union Army. We're here to, kind of help out. or they're going to be asked to sort of stay where they are and kind of keep doing what they're doing. Now, there's not a direct impetus that forces them to do that, but let's be clear here, not everybody in the United States Army was super excited about liberating slaves. It's just the truth of the situation. Not everybody in the North was anti-slavery. Not everybody in the South was pro-slavery. There were a wide variety of opinions that covered a lot of different stuff. And there were a lot of military leaders from the North that didn't necessarily want to have to deal with handling the operation of plantations in conquered territory. So to a lot of these generals who are taking this place over, they might just say, just keep doing what you're doing. We're going to leave some troops here to make sure that they don't come back and try to kill you, but just do your thing. Now, does that mean everybody stayed at these plantations that were liberated? No, of course not. Many of them left. Some of them did join up with the Union Army. Many of them moved to the North to try to find other jobs, but some of them did stay. And what do you do with these people? And I know that sounds like a horrible question to ask, but it's a very legitimate question to ask if you are fighting a war for the existence of your country, right? Solid Indiana facts. Awesome. Hoosiers, bless your heart. Hoosier State. Hey guys, recall to take the refer/equal raid. Oh yeah. If you could just click that little live icon, but it's not so big of a deal. I do appreciate it though. Honestly, what would help the most is if everybody that raided in just typed hello in the chat. The only thing that I'm really sort of going to get a massive benefit from is if I get a lot of active chatters, I get to unlock some more VIP badges. But I'm not necessarily worried about that, and nobody feel, compelled to do anything. I just hope that you're all having a good time and you're all just being cool people and doing your thing, right? Fun fact, in 1986, the town of Hawkins, Indiana was destroyed in a weird earthquake. It was rebuilt over the next 4 years, and to mark its new start in a new decade, it was renamed Erie, Indiana. Hey, I've seen that show. Hey, everybody. You all are awesome. Thank you, Animal Chin and KJ Dub. Welcome, welcome. What's up, Tad? Good to see you. Dun, 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 dun. Thank you, KJ, for that follow, and welcome to the adventure. Okay, so this is what's going on in 1861. Now, the Union doesn't have an overly large amount of territory at this point. And it's fair to note that at this particular point in the United States, it wasn't illegal to own slaves. And a lot of people go, wait, what? But what do you mean it wasn't illegal? Yeah, so slavery was still legal in the United States. 1860, 1861, 1862. So states like Missouri and Kentucky that had slaves that did not secede for the Union, they were still operating plantations, right? In Maryland, there were still plantations that were operating with slaves. So it's kind of a weird, sticky situation to be into. Now, the real question here is, at what point does Reconstruction begin? Now, the reason I mentioned 1861 is that some people are going to say as soon as the Union Army took property from Southern landowners and plantation owners, Reconstruction began. So as soon as they occupied territory that was formerly owned by slave operating people, that was the beginning of Reconstruction, because they tried to take over the governance of that area. Of course, it was military rule, but this was when Reconstruction began. Other people don't say it's 1861, so let's continue to 1862. Now, 1862 is a pretty big deal. The war turns a little bit in the Union favor, and they are going to start taking big chunks of territory, including things like the entire states of Tennessee. They're going to push the Confederate armies out of Kentucky and out of Missouri. Now, there's a lot of slave territory under the control of the Union in 1862. And what do we do with these enslaved individuals now? Well, That's the tough question. So when it was just a little bit of territory, we can kind of just make it up as we go. But now that we're controlling like entire states worth of areas, now we've really got to start deciding what we're going to do with this. And the idea is really try to recruit as many of them as we can to the war effort. The Union did not necessarily expect that the war would last as long as it did, and even by 1862 points, Lincoln was already figuring out that he needed more soldiers, right? So if we can get some of these freed slaves or liberated Southern slaves into the military, this would be great. But slavery still was legal, so they also could just say, keep doing what you're doing and we'll protect you from being completely brought back under control of the South, etc., etc. What's really going to change this, of course, is 1863. Another Indiana fact, it was the dog's name. It was the dog's name. Tonight we're talking about divided states in the United States. Aren't we? Aren't we all? 1863 is a big shift and a big pivot in the debate here, because of course in 1863 we get something very important called the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, what the Emancipation Proclamation does is declare slavery to be basically abolished within areas captured by the United States. So the way that Lincoln actually managed to do this through what was effectively an executive order was under the guise of this being a military occupation. So here's what's important. Because the president is the head of the military, any territory that is ultimately under the control of the president can be more or less operated by the president directly without Congress. Now, if Lincoln had gone to Congress in Washington, D.C. and said, I want to pass a bill that outlaws slavery, that would never have passed through Congress. Congress was highly divided, and Lincoln was not necessarily the most well-loved ruler at this particular point. So Lincoln is going to declare slavery to be abolished in territory that had been taken by the Union Army. So this is a big deal here. 1963 is the best year ever. 1863. Technically, maybe legally freed more slaves, the Emancipation Proclamation, or the 13th Amendment. Okay, so that's kind of a loaded question, because it asks us to draw a distinction between, were you actually freed at the moment you were said you were free, or were you freed when you finally gained freedom? And that is a legal distinction and a situational distinction that is incredibly difficult to argue one way or the other. I would tend to say you can call me free all day long, but I'm not free until I actually get free. With said free. So theoretically, if we're looking at who had been said to be free, the Emancipation Proclamation freed more people than the 13th Amendment did. Because at that point, Lincoln was sort of expressing that all of the South would eventually be taken by the Northern military, and that everybody that was currently under the control of the South was free. But of course, the Southern states did not listen to this because they were a different country, and the only places where that could be effectively administered was within direct territory that the Union controlled. The 13th Amendment said that slavery is abolished everywhere unless you're in jail. Interesting little rider there in the 13th, so make sure you go read that part about the 13th where you can still theoretically be put in slavery situations if you're in jail. Kind of comes back into play in modern day. There's been a whole bunch of legal stuff about that, by the way. It's not just as black and white as it looks on the page. So go look into that. That's a whole other story, though. Anyway, so Emancipation Proclamation does more in name than the 13th does. Did Congress still have representatives from the South? No, they did not. The Congress of the United States of America saw a whole bunch of walkouts, and it was only the states that were in the Union. The South had its own representative body and its own elected Congress and things like that. It had its own state-level governments and its own president and cabinet and things of that nature. So they were not still sending people to Washington. That's a good question, though. Isn't that always interesting? Largely controversial at the time, but now one of the most discussed presidents. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And see, this is another thing where a lot of people today look back at this period of time in a very, we understand everything factually sort of way, and a lot of people are looking at this from a position of where we are now, knowing what we know now, looking back in the past. But to get the real implications of a lot of these decisions, you have to sort of be willing to put yourself in kind of like a time capsule hat and go back to the situation at the time and try to understand the implications of the decisions at that point. And that's a substantially different situation in many cases. Prisoners earn pennies per the hour. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah, we have a prison industrial complex, and for-profit prisons, I feel, are quite literally crimes against humanity. But that's a whole other discussion as well. So the Emancipation Proclamation is a big deal. It changes the tenor and the tone of Southern occupation, and it actually does free the slaves in the territory that was taken directly. This sort of takes the decision out of the hands of the generals on the ground, and Lincoln makes that decision himself. Now, what's interesting is that also in 1863, Lincoln begins to work on plans on how to reintegrate southern states, right? So Tennessee at this point was effectively completely under the control of the Union Army. So what if Tennessee wanted to rejoin the Union? Well, how do they do that? So Lincoln puts together a very generous plan. And his plan basically says, here's the deal. If you have a list of your voters, right? Find me a voting list for Tennessee. And if 10% of your voting electorate agrees to take an oath to uphold the Emancipation Proclamation, I will allow your state to rejoin the Union. Now, that's pretty generous, right? 10% of the state's population takes an oath to uphold the Emancipation Proclamation, and they get to rejoin the Union, or at least get on a system or a pathway to rejoin the Union. Here's the thing. This plan does not sit well. Because upon the rejoining, right? So if you got your state back into the Union, several other things would happen. Number one, all of the physical property that had been taken that could be returned to property owners would be returned. Now, of course, that doesn't include slaves, because slaves no longer get counted as property. But if the Union had taken your house and your plantation, if your state rejoined the Union, you get your house and your plantation back. So this was an attempt by Lincoln to be able to get these states that were potentially going to be coming back into the Union back on the ground and back running as quickly as possible, because Lincoln understood that this was an economic situation just as much as it was a military situation, right? If you took the state back over and nobody had anything to make money off of, then this would become a liability for the United States, right? They would have to step in and basically take care of all of this stuff until all the situation had been worked out. I think the main reason we discuss him so much now is because Lincoln invented the internet, which is why we call them links. Yes, Lincoln also invented children's toys, most specifically the Lincoln Log. Wasn't Lincoln Kennedy's driver? I'm not certain about that. For-profit prisons sounds incredibly dystopian. Yes. States voting population. Yes. So if you were on the voting list, so this was white men that were of voting age. Folks without land would have whatever property was confiscated for them. At that point, there were not any states, to my knowledge, and it is potentially limited, that required you to own property as a male to be able to vote. At that point, I believe that all males within legal age that were not felons would have been able to vote regardless of property ownership. Now, you might have had to pay a poll tax to be able to vote, and if you didn't own property, you might not have been able to pay that, but I think that you didn't. Women did not count towards the state's population because they were not eligible to vote. Neither did freed slaves because they were not eligible to vote at this point. Tad says, I used to work for an insurance benefits company, and one of our clients was Core Civic, which had just changed its name from Corrections Corporation of America. When you found out they were a for-profit jail, yeah, I feel you, Tad. That's unfortunate and unfortunately common. Yeah, Foggage, we're talking about the 1860s, and it was a very, very different time, and the ideas were clearly very stuck in the past, as they were in the past. So, Lincoln's plan does not go over very well. His own party, the Republican Party, hates this plan, and they hated it for multiple reasons. Number one, they said this does not punish the South enough. There were people within Congress at the time in the United States that wanted to literally punish the South for causing the war, seceding from the Union, disruption, etc., etc. They wanted basically the South to take all of the blame for the war, and they wanted the South to then pay reparations for the war. And Lincoln's plan, the 10% plan, did not go far enough for them. Also, there were some people within Congress, both inside the Republican Party and outside the Republican Party. There were other parties, like there's Democrats and things of that nature, that said that Lincoln's 10% plan did not do enough to guarantee rights for freed slaves, because Lincoln's plan didn't give them citizenship, it didn't give them voting rights, it didn't really do anything to necessarily protect their status in these areas. So if you just let this state back into the Union and then you don't do anything to protect the freed slaves, you're sort of leaving them all, hung out to dry. And Lincoln was like, but this is the plan. And in 1864, things start moving. Like there are wheels in motion, because by 1864, the Union controlled Louisiana. And Louisiana, of course, down here on the Gulf Coast, this state here is Louisiana, has the biggest port city in the Gulf of Mexico, which is New Orleans. And New Orleans made a ton of money off of trade, and Louisiana made a lot of money subsequently off of trade itself. So Louisiana was very motivated to get back into the Union, and well, at least their leadership was. Not everybody in Louisiana is super excited about getting back into the Union. But Louisiana petitions to rejoin the Union under Lincoln's 10% plan, and the Republicans in Congress have a fit, because Lincoln says, all right, let's start working on it. And he starts putting together all of the wheels and putting together all the stuff, because he wants to get states back together. And the Republicans try to stop this. And this is a really important moment, because what ends up happening is the Republicans and several of a majority of Congress puts together a bill package called the Wade-Davis bill. Of course, this is named after the two guys that sponsored it. And the Wade-Davis bill is going to be important because of what it tried to do. The Wade-Davis bill said, we're going to modify Lincoln's 10% plan, and here's what we're going to do with it. Instead of 10% of registered voters taking an oath, we're going to require 50. 50% of a state's registered voters have to take an oath to support the Emancipation Proclamation. It also banned Confederates from being able to hold office within that state forever. So if you had been a general or a soldier of higher than just, basic foot soldier rank, so if you were like, any kind of officer, including non-commissioned officers, you could not run. If you had participated in any vote to secede from the Union, you couldn't run for office ever again. And if you had held office within the Confederate States of America, you could not run for office again. So basically, this is like if you were part of the larger Confederate States of America operating system, you were banned from public office, even public office within your state. Like you couldn't run for state governor anymore. Also, the Wade-Davis bill guaranteed slaves their civil rights, and it ratified the idea that slavery was illegal. So this said that basically within the territory of the United States, period, that slavery was illegal. So this is sort of like a proto-13th Amendment. Also, there were provisions for helping states to basically re-elect new slates of government, because remember, when you applied to become back in the state and you rejoin the state, you would then have to basically fire your entire state government, because the government that you had right now is a Confederate government. So there were provisions in place to do stuff like, we will help you for a couple of months re-elect new people because you can't transition with the government that you have right now. 70 years from now, white women will be able to vote. Yep, pretty much. Gen Z translation: Lincoln low-key got the bougie influencers on his side to convince the salty slavery stands to glow up. Huh. Man, it's great that no one ever offered unilateral pardons for all of that. Just wait, I know where you're going. So why were they able to pass those slave civic... here's the kicker. The Wade-Davis bill hits Lincoln's desk, and Lincoln doesn't sign it. So there's a 30-day period of time where a president is expected to be able to sign a bill, and a president can do a maneuver called a pocket veto, whereby if that 30-day period expires while Congress is sort of out of session, the bill just effectively dies. He doesn't actually have to veto it. He doesn't actually have to sign veto on it. It just is automatically vetoed. And it's called the pocket veto. So Lincoln just let it sit there and it died. So the Wade-Davis bill never actually took effect. That's why all of this stuff didn't get to go into place. And when Lincoln pocket vetoed the Wade-Davis bill, this made a lot of people really, really furious. Really furious. Because this was going to be sort of like the new thing. This was a thing that Congress could agree on regardless of their political party, right? It had a majority of people in Congress. Lincoln just said that it went too far, that it would cripple the South, that it would not allow the South to get back integrated fast enough, that it was too harsh, that it did too much, and that it was not something that was ultimately going to lead towards the country being able to unify in a sort of mutually positive way. Now, a lot of people go, there was no way that they were going to ever be able to come back together in a mutually beneficial way because the South was very upset about losing slavery. And that is an absolutely fair point to make. Lincoln may have been really naive at this particular point, expecting everybody to just go, oh, it's fine. It wasn't fine. The 24-hour news people must have been livid. Oh, man. I'm not even going to go there. All right, so let's move a bit to 1865. Now, 1865 sees some interesting developments, sort of outside of Lincoln's ability to directly affect, kind of, with this guy. So this guy is William Tecumseh Sherman. Someone earlier mentioned is Marching to the Sea Reconstruction. This is the Union general who made the famous March to the Sea. This was done as a way to effectively demoralize the southern states that were still hanging on by 1864. especially the state of Georgia. After ransacking Atlanta, Sherman basically burned everything between himself and the Atlantic coastline. But in one of the sort of more forward-thinking moments of Sherman's operation, he passed something or ordered something called Special Field Order Number 15. Okay, Special Field Order Number 15. This is a pretty important moment because he had been given what is basically free reign by Lincoln to, Lincoln and Grant. Of course, Ulysses S. Grant was the head commander of the Union Army. Sherman had been given basically license to commit total war and do whatever he needed to, so he had a lot of unilateral ability to act. And Special Field Order 15 said that coastal plots of land along the Atlantic coastline in Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina were going to be designated as territory for freed slaves. So Sherman says, look, we're going to take this coastline right here. So this is Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. So this region right here especially, and you can even see it from space, this really good green area right here, this area is going to be occupied by the Union Army. We're going to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation, and then we're going to start drawing 40-acre plots in this region, and we're going to give those 40-acre plots to freed slaves. And this is going to be their land, and they're going to be able to work that land, and they're going to be able to turn that into a way to make a living. I hear he has a very tasteful necktie. Yeah, indeed. Reconstruction was lit. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Special Field Order Number 15 is what you get at the vegan restaurant. Is it... I don't know. I'm not going to go there because I don't know how to make that a more funny joke than it already is. I would probably just ruin it. What about the mule? So that's 40 acres and a mule is in the westward expansion movement. And it's not necessarily ironic that Sherman, after the Civil War, gets moved to the west in the territories, where a lot of that 40 acres and a mule stuff is going on. So there we go. All right. So Special Field Order Number 15, pretty big deal. Also, Congress decides that they're going to take part of that Wade-Davis bill and they're going to put it into law. And they pass through Congress the 13th Amendment. That's the 12th. That's still the 12th. 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment says that there can be no slavery in the United States of America. It is officially abolished, and everybody that was a former slave is no longer a slave. Now, this gets ratified really quickly in the North, right? None of the states in the South ratify this because they are not technically part of the United States anymore. Now, states along the border that had limited numbers of slaves or that had lower per capita numbers of slaves, like Kentucky and Missouri and Maryland, these slave states that were not part of the Confederate States of America, they didn't ratify it very quickly at all, but when it hits that magic tipping point of 2/3 of the states in the country, it kicks in for the entire country anyway. So some of them got brought into this situation potentially against their will. In the case of especially Missouri, definitely against their will, but such is the way that republics work. Another thing that comes out of 1865 is a very important group called the Freedmen's Bureau. So the Freedmen's Bureau was set up by Congress to be a group of individuals dedicated to helping freed slaves. And this was for a lot of different ways. Now, the most obvious way was to help try to find them get land, right? The Freedmen's Bureau was going to find land that was either run or operated by the military and get freed slaves onto that land. Land like the land designated by Sherman, right? But this is also so that they can find other jobs in shipping or jobs in the railroad or jobs in the military, right? Because we're still fighting a war. This is also to provide a basic level of health care to these people, right? Because none of the doctors in the South that were, well, I shouldn't say none because that's all inclusive. Most of the doctors in the South that were white were not going to be able to, well, they weren't willing to, and many of them couldn't give aid to the population of freed slaves. So you got to do what you got to do, right? You thought the southern states, finger quote, never left. Oh no, they totally did. They seceded. Gonna have to get going, but it was nice to catch what you could of the stream. Metran, take it easy. Have a good night. You learned about the Freedmen's Bureau in a genealogy class earlier this year. Well, that's pretty cool. I want to ask you a lot about that, but that's it's not the time for that. I really like genealogy. It's one of my sort of my topics. I guess I'm very biased that I enjoy the history of myself. How dorky is that, right? But the Freedmen's Bureau gets established into 1865, and it's going to run for 3 years until 1868, and then sort of have some programs that pick up after that. But it's established in 1865. Now, at this point, the war is going to end. So in 1865, the last of the Southern armies surrender to the North. And the war is officially going to end. Now, at that point, all of the Southern states were effectively under military occupation by the North. So, some people say at the end of the Civil War, when all of the Southern states were under military occupation by the North, this is when Reconstruction begins. Some people say that. But a lot of people go, well, what about all of that other stuff? All of that stuff prior to the end of the war? What about all of that taking of the land and freeing of the slaves and all of that stuff? Wasn't that Reconstruction? You get to make your own decisions, right? I'm not going to tell you what I say. The Southern states didn't leave. They didn't grow legs and walk away. Yes, they seceded. Correct. They left the Union. They dissolved their ties with the United States and the United States Constitution, and they formed a new government whereby they wrote a new constitution through what legal framework? That's actually a fair question. And one of the things that happens after, well, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. When we get to 1867, I'll bring this back around to that. But theoretically, all of the states in the United States are part of the United States by choice, not by compulsion. When the first government of the United States, the Articles of Confederation, were passed, it was up to each individual state to decide whether or not it wanted to join up. Right? When the Constitution was written in 1787, it was up to each individual state to decide if they were going to ratify it. And there were actually some states that said, we don't want to ratify this Constitution. It would be better if we made our own country. Can other states choose to expel a state? No. White doctors, black patients. Yeah, so there were not enough doctors to go around for the number of people that were there. And the doctors that were in the South were almost certainly not going to be willing to treat freed slaves. So how do the viewer requests work? Eric, there are 2 ways. Well, actually 3 ways. There are 3 ways to get a viewer request. Number 1, you can be married to me and have a birthday. But that position, like on Patreon, there's only 1 spot on that Patreon side, and I'm not giving that one up. So you can't have that one. The other 2, you can redeem one. So if you hang around long enough to get viewer points, little adventure points that are below you, if you get 10,000 points, you can buy a viewer request stream from me. Now, I know that not everybody is going to be around for 10,000 points, so we also vote on them. So last time we did a viewer request stream last Tuesday, I just took suggestions and I said, I'll take the first 3 topics that people throw into the chat, and just got to be quick on the keyboard and throw that in there, and that gets put in a poll, and then everybody in the chat gets to vote. Like, what do you want to talk about? So next Tuesday, we'll be talking about the Empire of Sweden. So that's next Tuesday's stream. So that's how you get viewer requests done. You have a list, Ohio. Well, I know that whole Toledo thing still burns a little bit, but it is what it is, right? Okay, so the war ends in 65. Does this start Reconstruction? Well, something else big happens in 65. The big thing that happens in 65 is President Lincoln gets shot and killed. And we get a new president. This guy. This is Johnson. Andrew Johnson. Now, in a weird turn of events, Andrew Johnson was a Democrat. Lincoln was a Republican. So what's going on with that? Well, things in the past were not as easy as they are now. There have been legislative maneuvers done to make things more easy and more handleable. Anyway, Johnson. Johnson is much more aligned with the Southern Democrat way of life. He was the vice president, and he became the president upon the death of Lincoln. Now, Johnson has a very different plan. Johnson has his own way of doing stuff. And he goes, here's how states get to come back in. So 10% plan of Lincoln is out. Louisiana doesn't get all the way through coming in under Lincoln's plan, so they have to basically start over with the new Johnson plan. So here's what the Johnson plan says. All right. To get back in, instead of certain percentages of people swearing to accept the Emancipation Proclamation, what you've got to do as a state, on a state level legislature, you have to ratify the 13th Amendment. So in your state legislature, for you to get back into the country, you have to ratify 13. All right? That handles the legally getting part. So what about all of those old Confederates? Johnson says, you have to apply to me on a case-by-case basis. And if I, as president, think that you are worthy of being allowed back into politics, I will give you a pardon on a case-by-case basis. So now that already makes some people angry, because the decider is going to be whether or not Johnson is friends with these people. Also, all property is going to be returned, minus slaves. So this also sort of already gets a little bit of consternation going, because what about land that had already been designated by the Freedmen's Bureau or Special Field Order 15 for slaves? Johnson goes, we'll see about that when we get there, right? Are we still angry about, the history of Michigan's Toledo? Fuck, it's just like OHI, case by case. Yeah, pretty much. So when Johnson takes over, here we go. Human beings held in bondage weren't property to begin with. Can confirm. But it is important to designate the fact that at that point, legally speaking, those people were considered to be property. I know they weren't property because it's horrible to consider the concept of voting another person in the first place. I am completely against slavery. If you're pro-slavery, we have words for that, and it's like immoral, horrible, terrible, lots of things. Anyway, but legally speaking, slaves were not considered property anymore and were not to be returned under the give everybody back their stuff. So here's the thing. Johnson starts giving out a lot of pardons, and it's kind of like everybody that asks him. It's not 100% of people that ask him for pardons, but it's most of them. And it is a lot of people that were pretty high up in the old Confederacy. And this is not sitting well with the Republicans in Congress. And then he starts returning property to people. And he starts returning property that had been set aside by Sherman in Special Field Order number 15, and he starts returning land that had been given to people by the Freedmen's Bureau. So here are these people that for maybe a year and a half had been working this land under a new state of freedom, and now they're being told, you don't actually own this land anymore. It's going back to the person that owned it prior to the war beginning, and you have to work with them to figure out whether or not you're going to be able to stay here and work either to pay off the debt or to maybe earn money to buy that land from them, etc., etc. Didn't Johnson host a rally and just say, you're pardoned to the whole crowd? I don't know if that actually happened or if that was based on a political cartoon. I know that I have seen, I think, maybe a Thomas Nast political cartoon where he's pardoning his entire dinner party or pardoning his entire political rally. I can't remember. I don't have a specific point of reference for that. I don't know. Maybe. They would not... If it didn't happen, which I can't say that it did or didn't, it is not outside the possibility of something that could be joked about at least, right? So this is turning into something that does not sit well with a lot of people. So what happens? Well, things start going sideways. The South doesn't like even these very basic ideas of rejoining the Union. And they also don't like the fact that the North still has 100... Dun dun dun. Dun 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 dun. Is that Violace or Vioesia? I need to get better legible letters here in my world. So that is Violace. Violace, thank you so much for that follow, and welcome to the adventure. So, here's... Dun 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 dun. Dueling Needles, thank you for the follow, and welcome to the adventure. If you see the little emote flying around here, by the way, this is the adventure hat. I do archaeology stuff whenever I can get around to it, and have a hat that I wear because I'm super pasty pale and I burn like a lobster. So that's the little emote that you keep seeing flying around there. I'm glad you're enjoying the stream. Feel free to participate at whatever level if you want to. You can throw in questions. They don't necessarily have to be directly related. If it's a bad pun or a side thing or a pop cultural reference, it's all good. No, absolutely. We appreciate tangents and chatting here. That's the whole point of it. This isn't like a lecture, right? I hate considering these lectures. It's more of a, I like to use the fancy schmancy phrase, guided conversation, right? So, what's up, Emmy? Good to see you. We've got some friends in the chat. I need to do some shout outs. Color by Emmy is in the chat. If you aren't following Color by Emmy, please do go give her a follow. If you see the little adventure Shane down in the corner over there with the cute little adventure hat flapping in the wind, Emmy designed that and also helped me with my layout here. Is a great artist that you should work with if you need the art stuff like sprucing up of your group and stuff like that, or your stream design and all of that fun stuff. We've got David Peterson is in the chat, who is a author and illustrator of comic books and comic art, and well, I guess any kind of art. Really talented guy, really cool dude, good friend, and you should totally go give him a follow. If you're familiar with Mouse Guard, that's his most popular work. Currently up for an Eisner Award, which is basically the Oscar awards for comic books, and already has several of them. So he's a highly decorated comic book artist and illustrator and organizer. But I would love to see him win a couple more of those if he could get them. So there we go, David Peterson. Everybody go give David a follow. Green Herring says, I feel like we should all be drinking tea. It's so fancy. Yeah, everything's so proper here in the South, you know. Actually, I am from the South, and I worked pretty hard to try to eliminate as much of my Southern accent as possible. But every now and then it comes loose, especially when I'm around my family a lot, who still speak quite a bit in a very thick Southern drawl. Anyway, so things are going a bit sideways, and the South is very much not happy. The South is under military occupation. There are close to 200,000 Union troops occupying southern territories. Their land is not coming back to them as fast as they would like, and this ratification of the 13th Amendment thing is just absolutely unthinkable to them. And this is when they're going to start passing a lot of laws in the South. And these are going to be what are referred to in the time as black codes. So black codes, of course, are going to be things like vagrancy laws. A vagrancy law would basically say that if you do not have a job and you are without a home, you are considered a vagrant. And vagrancy was against the law, so they could put you in jail. And jail became the new slavery, very literally the new slavery. A lot of laws were passed about what sort of jobs black people in the South could hold. They could only work in field labor in some states. They could only work in manual labor typed jobs in some states. They were only allowed to basically function as limited members of society. They were not guaranteed citizenship at this point. So the laws that were passed by these state governments were designed specifically to perpetuate the white control over African Americans in the South. That's just what they were trying to do. Also, in 1865, we get the rise of the KKK with people like this guy. So this is Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was one of the more successful Confederate cavalry officers during the Civil War. And he and a group of other, specifically Tennessee Confederates, are going to form the Ku Klux Klan. And the KKK, of course, was designed specifically to terrorize black people in the South, to prevent them from participating in society, and to punish anyone that was attempting to make it easier for blacks to participate in the South. And this included northern military units that were still stationed in the South, and of course this is going to be targeting the good old-fashioned people that become known as carpetbaggers. So a carpetbagger was in reference to a person who came from the north to the south during this period of time in order to profit from the South. Now, not everybody from the North was a carpetbagger, but this is a word that begins to be used to qualify anybody that was from the North that was pro African American integration, right? If you were pro-equality, even if you weren't coming to the South looking for land deals or to snap up industrial materials from people that were poor, et cetera, you were going to be labeled a carpetbagger. Now, here's the thing. There's a grain of truth to that, because there were people from the North that especially had large investments in the North, that had liquid capital, that went to the South specifically with the goal of buying industrial capacity, buying up railroads, buying port warehouses and things of that nature, because the Southern economy at that point was very, very poor. It was still under military occupation. A lot of people did not have their land returned to them yet. And the people that did have their land returned to them weren't able to operate slavery anymore because the slaves were freed, right? So if they didn't have liquid capital in the South, they might be in a position where they had to sell what they had to the North. So there were people from the North that really were coming to the South to do predatory purchasing. Predatory. And I know that's like, that seems like, oh, you're not supposed to talk about that, but it really did happen, right? The thing about history is that it's not always pretty, right? It's not always the way that people want it to be. It's just what happened. So the KKK was targeting people like that. If you were trying to buy someone's land out from under them and that person was a white Southerner, you might find yourself strung up from a tree, right? The KKK was a group that was dedicated to using violence and intimidation to preserve white supremacy in the South, and there's no other way to handle that. So this is going to be a very tumultuous year, because there is also this big issue with seating situations. But didn't quite a few slaves stay to work on the plantations that figured out they had a better life with a roof over their heads instead of being homeless and penniless? They did. And that's a fair thing to say. Some people that had plantations in the South had enough money to be able to pay people that used to be their former slaves. And some of them did, in fact, stay on as laborers for a person that would have been their previous slave owner. But before we go kind of too far out into, oh, that sounds great, let's remember that there were not any wage laws, right? So there wasn't a minimum wage situation. And it might have been that they weren't penniless, but they only had a couple of pennies to begin with, right? So they might have been fronted a lot of value. They might have said, so there's no OSHA. A landowner might have said, I will give you the cabin and I will feed you from the profits of the field, but now you owe me $10,000 and I'll pay you a little bit, but you still owe me. So even in situations where people did decide to stay on the plantation that they had previously worked on, they weren't guaranteed fair treatment, they weren't guaranteed fair wages, and they definitely were not guaranteed citizenship at this point, right? So they still didn't have a legal voice. They would basically be operating under the hopes that whatever regional northern military unit that was nearby would be able to enforce some level of parity or equality. From the song 15 Tons. Right. So that's a little bit that's a little bit more geared towards a particular situation within the Industrial Revolution, but it's very much the same sort of concept, right? The company store that you work to pay off the stuff that they're giving you already, and you go out and you work a whole bunch, and at the end of the day, you're deeper in debt, right? So that's a very good parallel that you got there. What's up, Tuna? Yeah, it's good to see you. We got a really big raid. We got two raids, actually. We got a raid from Steve Conley, and then we got a raid from Dr. WD40. So, yeah, lots of new friends in the chat tonight. Got a lot of new follows, and hope everybody's having a good time. And for real, seriously, if you have questions or if you want to just throw something in the chat, it's cool. It really is. Don't bother about interrupting me. People interrupt me all the time. I teach college. It's all good. You could all be staring at your cell phones right now and I wouldn't know. All right, so there's another big thing that happens here that is sort of a big scandal. And this actually gets back to a question that Brittany asked earlier. In 1865, there are state level elections, and a lot of states in the South send a whole bunch of representatives to Congress. Now, here's the question. If the Confederate States of America doesn't exist anymore, which it didn't, upon the surrender of the South, the Confederate States of America ceased to exist. So when the state people elect state representatives, don't they then go to Washington, D.C.? So, if Mississippi decides to elect senators, do those federal senators then go to Washington, D.C.? Well, that's the question. Are they allowed back in yet? At this point, no state had been allowed back in. But that doesn't stop them from sending representatives. There is this giant collection of some 100 representatives that are from southern states that go up to Washington, D.C. And when the House of Representatives comes to order for the beginning of the legislative session, they refuse to seat the representatives from the South. This is referred to sometime as the 1865 seating scandal. But basically, if you are not allowed a seat by the Speaker of the House, you can't stay. Or by the President of the Senate. You can't stay in Congress. You have no ability to speak or vote or introduce legislation. You're basically not allowed in. So at this point, the South has elected representatives and sent them to D.C., and now they're being told, no, you don't get representation. And a lot of people say, aha, that's where Reconstruction starts, because now they're trying to participate, and now you don't even get seated. So now Reconstruction has started. Exposed! Put the cell phone away. No, that's fine. Play on your cell phone. Do your thing. Staring at cell phone to watch on mobile. Ah, Tad, you found the magic loophole, right? You're from Puerto Rico, because that's what they do to us. Tropical, I think that Puerto Rico should be able to vote in Congress. But this is even less... Dun, dun, dun. Dun, 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 dun. Greenblood, thank you so much for that follow, and welcome to the adventure. This is actually worse than what the current 2022 Congress does to the representative of Puerto Rico, because the representative from Puerto Rico to the House can talk. They have speaking rights. They can actually call for speaking privileges, and they can stand up and talk in Congress. And they can help sponsor legislation. What the Congress did to the Southern representatives was even worse than that. They basically did not even let them in the door. KJ, thank you very much. Much appreciated. And you are very much welcome at any point in the future. And I hope you have a great one if you're heading on out. Less than which we got is 0. Yeah. So it's pretty low. So Puerto Rico has very little, that they can't vote in Congress as a territory, but they do have a territorial representative. Same for Guam and the American Samoan Islands, and etc. Yeah, they were blackballed. They couldn't get in. So a lot of people go, haha, this is Reconstruction now. But is it Reconstruction? Or has it been Reconstruction? We don't really know. By the end of 1865, though, what we do know is that there are still 150,000 plus Union soldiers in the South. And, well, they did just fight to not be in Congress. In D.C., right. So D.C. is a district. It's a special district and has a representative but doesn't have voting power. DC statehood is a tricky conversation. That's a good one, Green Herring. I would love to splinter off on that one. We would be on that rabbit hole for a little bit. No, the Vatican is a sovereign nation. The Vatican has substantially more power than DC, even though it's fractional size of DC. Green Herring has feelings on that. I think it's a conversation that needs to happen. I really do. All right, so by the end of 1865, a lot has happened in 1865. 150,000 troops are still in the South. By the way, this is going to be a big stream. Is that not why you were here? Nick Solotl. Greetings, Nick Solotl. For those of you that are not familiar with my friend Nick Solotl, Nix is a very talented artist that does animation stuff and does 2D art, does the incredibly cute little waving axolotl emote, and does the puppy head pat emote that you see there. And you should go give Nix a follow. A great time. Good to see you back on stream, Nix. I hope that means that the move went well and that you've got everything set back up and things are going swimmingly. It's good to see you, my friend. Hope that you had a good day and a great stream. What were you working on? If you have links and everything that you want to share with us, absolutely throw those in the lid. You have a card table. Woo! Hey, it's better than nothing, right? Share your Instagram and all of that fun stuff too. So this stream is going to go for a while. It's kind of long, but such is life, right? You got to talk about all of this stuff. All right, 1866. Stuff happens. A lot of stuff happens. First off, Congress passes a bill to re-up the Freedmen's Bureau. And Johnson vetoes it. Oh, wow, doing some action poses and some character studies. Oh, that's cool. There's a lot of movement and emotion in these. That's great stuff. Thank you, Nix. I'm assuming the beginning of stream. eComposer, no, we are an hour and 37 minutes in. So we've been at it just a little bit. Oh, you use Twitter more. That's cool. That's cool. Whatever you do. Okay. So Congress introduces a bill to re-establish the Freedmen's Bureau for another year. Johnson vetoes it. And Johnson vetoes it because he wants to give land back to Southerners. Around this time, he had actually gone on record and said that the southern states had to be run by white people. And if there's a more racist statement that you could make, I'm sure you could try, but that's pretty friggin' racist coming from the President of the United States. He had basically vetoed the Freedmen's Bureau because he wanted to make sure that the land was able to go back to the people who had it prior to the war, not to freed slaves. That's what he did. Now, Congress tries to fire back, and they write up a civil rights bill, and it says black people are going to have citizenship. They're going to have equality under the law. They're going to be able to practice freedoms just like every other citizen. Johnson vetoes it. And at this point, Congress is really upset with Johnson, and they override his veto. And this is the first time, really, in United States history that a piece of legislation this big had been overridden. Congress had overridden smaller things in the past, but like big sweeping legislation like this was a big deal, and Johnson got really, really, really upset. So what is Congress to do? Well, they say, if you're going to be a jerk, we're going to do something else. And they write up the 14th Amendment. Now, the 14th Amendment, of course, is going to grant citizenship to everyone born in the United States. And what this basically says is, If you were born within the boundaries of the United States, you are a citizen, and you have all rights and legal abilities that every other citizen has, including all of those Bill of Rights things, right? Including voting rights, including all of that stuff. The 14th Amendment does not get picked up as quickly as the 13th did. Not women. Oh, no. Women don't get the right to vote until, much later. But if you are a free man in the United States, you get the right to vote of age. So when they pass the 14th Amendment, it doesn't immediately get ratified. Of course, nobody in the South loves this, but even states in the North don't like this. The other day, as in they just got the right to vote the other day. Historically speaking, it wasn't really that far ago. Anyway, so what ends up happening here is the 14th Amendment, which everybody thought that people were going to just jump on, hits the states. Some of them sign it really fast, but it doesn't hit the 2/3 tipping point. And by the way, this is not including the southern states. So it doesn't hit 2/3 tipping point even in the northern states. And a lot of people look at this and they go, well, why not? Wasn't the North super anti-slavery? Again, not everybody. There were people that were anti-slavery that didn't think black people were equal. They thought slavery was bad, but they still didn't think that black people and white people were equal. There were people that thought that freed slaves should be repatriated to Africa. There were people that thought that freed slaves should be repatriated to South America or the Caribbean. There were people that thought that the slave states should basically be forced to take all of the population of freed slaves into their areas, and that they would then have to pass state-level legislation to make those people equal, but the people in the North were not necessarily completely convinced that they were equal. And I know that this is sort of contra the narrative that a lot of people want to push about this time period, but it's the truth. Not everybody was on board with the idea that freed slaves were citizens, as evidenced by the fact that it took 2 years for the 14th Amendment to get ratified. So it's a lot more nuanced than a lot of people want to talk about. And all of Michigan was on board. I actually don't know when Michigan ratified the 14th. I don't know. Oh, you went back and checked. Cool. People agree with stuff. Ohio, on the other hand, was Ohio one of the holdouts? Maybe so. I don't actually know when each individual state ratified it. But that would be an interesting thing to look at. Okay, so 14th Amendment, it's a big deal. Oh, you don't actually... Okay, well, I was going to take you at your word. So I guess that says something about me. But something starts happening. 14th Amendment passes. Tennessee applies for readmission. Now, if you'll remember, Tennessee was the first state that was from the South that had been taken over by the Union Army. So they had been under the control of the Union military for between 1 and 4 years longer than all of the other southern states. So Tennessee applies, they ratify the 13th, and they get let back into the Union. But they don't ratify the 14th. So Congress then demands that to get back into the Union, you have to get both of them. You got to do 13 and 14. And Johnson goes, I don't know. Can we just let him in on 13 because that was part of my plan? you guys did this 14th thing, and it wasn't really part of my plan, because remember the Johnson plan just said you only have to ratify the 13th. You don't have to ratify the 14th under the Johnson plan. And Congress gets so mad at Johnson. They are just absolutely furious at him. And in the midterm elections that happened in 1866, Republicans are going to win a supermajority in both houses. This is a very important moment. When we get to 1867, and Congress is seated in 1867, the Senate and the House both have a Republican supermajority, which means they can pass a law and they can overrule and override the president veto on everything. So basically at this point, and it's one of the few times in history that this has ever happened in the United States, Congress can do whatever it wants to, and all the president can do is veto in vain. And this brings us to a point of time that is referred to as radical Reconstruction. And some people go, okay, well, Reconstruction was bad enough, but it really doesn't start until 1867. Ohio ratified on the 14th, 12 days before Michigan. Oh no. that burns. That burns in the wound. Michigan had a state holiday from the 3rd to the 15th, so you have an excuse. Congressman John A. Bingham of Ohio, the primary author of the first section of the 14th Amendment. There we go. Moose forgot it was Tuesday. Alas. Totally Tubular Reconstruction didn't have the alliteration. Yeah, pretty much. But anyway. This is a moment in time where things go really, really fast. And they go really, really to one side. This is partisan politics at its worst. Dun 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 dun. The Beppo. Thank you so much for that follow. And welcome to the adventure. All right. Radical Reconstruction. What happens? Lots. John Bingham was born in Toledo when it was still Michigan, so he's really a Michigander. Do you know that, or are you just making that up? Because now I am skeptical. I'm lying. He was born in Pennsylvania. All right. What does Radical Reconstruction do? Whatever the Republicans want. So what do they start with? Well, they pass a slate of legislation that are generally referred to as the Reconstruction Acts. And a lot of people go, this is where Reconstruction really started. Because it said that the South, minus Tennessee, notably, was to be divided into 5 military districts, and those military districts were to be placed under full martial law. And when I say full martial law here, I mean the state legislations were dissolved. Because they also passed a bill that suspended and dissolved the state's constitutions in the South. Now, that's massive federal overreach if I've ever seen it, right? So if you had a state constitution that mentioned slavery, part of it being legal, your constitution was suspended and non-valid. And you, as a state, say Mississippi or Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee, you know how to go write another state constitution. And you go, well, who's running the show? If we don't have a constitution, that means all of our positions are invalid. And they're like, yeah, they're completely invalid because you're under military domination. You're like, ooh, that's kind of rough. They're like, yeah, that's the point. They also say that in order to rejoin, you have to pick up 13 and 14. They also say that Congress now has control over any position that they had approved. All right. So if so let's say cabinet position, right? Like if I want to nominate the Attorney General is the head of the Department of Justice. The president picks the Attorney General. The Attorney General goes before Congress and gets approved by the Senate. Well, at that point, this particular period of time, Congress said the president can't fire that person without the Senate saying so. Because if we, as the Senate, approved them, we, as the Senate, have to disapprove of them. So they literally took from Johnson, who was the president, the ability to fire his own people, including any appointees that had to have been approved by Congress. You're welcome. You don't know how you landed here, potentially with either Nick Slottle or Dr. WD-40 or Steve Conley. But the U.S. history is pretty interesting, especially because you don't know about that much as a Central European. Oh, well, welcome. What part of Central Europe? I've been to some. I would love to go to all. I love travel. It's one of my things. Thank you. I was about to have to create a special fact check David Peterson tab on your browser. Radical reconstruction of the neighborhood. Half pipe back in the 90s, right? What would Shane's solution have been instead of the Constitution nullification / federal overreach? So just like by basis, the federal government should not have the power to completely dissolve a state constitution. That's the entire purpose of federalism, right? Now, if a state tries to pass a specific law that goes against constitutional precedent, then the federal government, under the court system, should be able to sue that state and then have the courts say this law is unconstitutional, because that's the purpose of the courts. So in that situation, what I would have done is specifically had lawsuits launched against particular phrases within the individual states' constitutions, and then had the Supreme Court or the court system declare those to be unconstitutional, and then have them struck from the individual states' constitutions instead of completely dissolving their entire governments. That was like a 9.5 of 10 on the harsh scale. The only other thing that they could have done that would have been worse is to dissolve everything and then tell them you can't make another one. You don't think that the situation required faster solutions and lawsuits? The southern states were already under military control anyway. And on something like that, the Supreme Court would have almost certainly passed judicial review up to the Supreme Court really, really fast. And they could have fast-tracked that in a week. The way that Congress had control at that point, they could have written a bill, debated the bill, passed the bill. Johnson could have tried to veto it or signed it or overridden it, and then they could have had stuff waiting on the desks of the Attorney General to file those lawsuits immediately upon the bill passing, and the Supreme Court could have just said, we're going to look at this immediately because this is a valuable precedent to set, and they could have had that done very, very, very rapidly. I understand what you're saying, that the goal here is to make sure that the South is not abusing African American people or freed slaves, because they still were. Absolutely still were. The issue here is, do we allow precedent of this nature to be set? Do we want this to happen again in the future? I mean, if this had become the law of the land, what would have happened if, let's say, President Trump, who had both control of both houses of the Congress, said, Michigan, your state constitution is kaput. You're under military domination. You've got to go get new people and have a new election because I don't like the way that you voted. Right? You got to think about the whole line of precedent here that you're establishing. It's a scary thing, but I get where you're coming from. You don't want to leave people in situations where they're going to be taken advantage of, and the speed and the expedition of this was incredibly important. I mean, well, yeah, but because there are precedents in order for that. So, anyway, 1867 and radical Reconstruction is going to have pretty big backlashes. There are going to be people in the South like this guy. This is Alcibiades de Blanc. Alcibiades de Blanc. You're like, who the devil is that guy? Well, this guy was a rich upper class government official in Louisiana, and he's going to start a group of people that's called the Order of the Knights of the Camellia. So the camellia, of course, is a white flower. It's a very common southern flower. Knights of the White Camellia are going to be a group of mostly educated, mostly upper class people that are going to work together in order to ensure that politics and voting and government in the South is still run by white people. Now you go, well, why didn't he just join the KKK? Well, there's actually social distinction here. Most of the people that had joined the KKK were working class people, lower class people, and especially white people that had been either run out of a job or somehow hurt by the Union Army. A lot of former veterans joined up with the KKK, but these would have been people that were, kind of your everyday average lower middle class person. The White Camellia was a different organization. These are people that are in power, in positions, high class, people with means, and this is in a direct response to things like radical Reconstruction. So they're like KKK premium, exactly. It seems like America has a deep history of undermining core American values to protect American values. Yeah, that's one of the things, Tuna. When you're in a democracy or in a democratic republic, how do you determine at what point the tipping point is? Right? At what point do you activate federal power as opposed to state power? At what point do you activate legal power through the judicial branch of the government, or do you enact legislative power through the legislative branch or executive power through the executive branch? Where do you fill in the gray area? And the answer is, it's hard to say. And one of the reasons why the Constitution is still in effect today is because it left a lot of things somewhat ambiguous, and it allowed for interpretation of the law. But unfortunately, that has left a lot of things ambiguous, and it doesn't directly say, shall enough. It says stuff like may or can, and in many cases, the interpretation of that law comes down to politically minded individuals that are going to make decisions that are ultimately better for party and not better for majority, or not in line with majority. And how then do we rectify such decisions? There are mechanisms in place to do so, but are people going to exercise those mechanisms to get the desired effect? That's the question. How motivated is the average American at making certain that the opinion of the majority is reflected while the privileges and rights of the minorities are protected, right? So where is the activism in that level, right? Your whole educational life, you thought it was Knights of the Chameleon. Yeah, Camellia. So, radical Reconstruction is a thing. 1867 ends with a problem, because Andrew Johnson decides that he wants to fire some people in his cabinet. And he does fire them. And then Congress goes, you can't fire them, because we just passed a law that said you can't fire them. And Johnson goes, they're fired. And this brings us to 1868, and things get a little bit sideways. If they weren't already sideways, they are now more sideways, because Johnson gets brought up under impeachment charges. The House of Representatives votes to impeach him, and his trial in the Senate is the closest trial that has ever happened in American history. He retains the presidency by literally one vote. If one person had switched their mind to impeach him, he would have been removed from office. And this is because he was so diametrically opposed to the way that the Republicans were running things that when they caught him in something, they were going to rake him over the coals for it. So he does manage to retain the presidency, but he really doesn't have very much power left. Wonder if there was a lady behind all of this. Oh, like behind every powerful man, there's a powerful woman. Women were finding their political voice during this period of time on both sides of the discussion. In the North, women were beginning to seriously push for voting rights during this period of time. Also, the beginnings of the temperance movement, which would one day go on to basically get the 18th Amendment passed, which instituted prohibition in the United States. That started around this time as well. And most of the temperance movement, political motivation started with women. And in the South, women were getting politically involved because what they were doing at the time was beginning to develop what goes on to become known as the lost cause mythology. Have I already explained the switching ideologies of the parties? I have not, but that happens basically with the Civil Rights Act under LBJ in the 60s, 64, 65. But this 1964, 65, so that's 100 years in the future. But no, I have not talked about that directly on stream. That would be an interesting viewer request stream, though, in the future. All right. Johnson gets impeached, but under the new radical Republican plan, some states do rejoin the Union. Florida, North and South Carolina, Alabama, and Arkansas are allowed back into the United States. And when that happens, they are allowed to elect their own local representatives and send them to Congress. And what's notable is that in some situations, out of those states, there are people that run that are black. And that is a big kind of shocker to some people. Like, holy crap. Really? They're going to let... Really? Yeah. Interesting stuff here. So, it's pretty clear that Johnson was not going to run for president again, but we do mean this guy. This guy is Ulysses S. Grant, and he becomes the next president after Johnson. So this is in the 1868 election. Also around this time, the 14th Amendment gets ratified nationally because with the addition of these new states, Florida, Carolina, North and South Carolina, Alabama, and Arkansas, this pushes the 14th Amendment over into ratification. Let's also remember that 13 and 14 were required under the new plan to be let back into the states. So the Republicans who wanted 14 to get ratified nationwide are going to benefit from the fact that they are requiring the southern states to adopt it, because that then pushes them over 2/3 in the overall. Whiskey in the Jar Grant. Fun trivia. What does S stand for? Oop, wrong button. Probably nothing. Just like Harry S. Truman stands for nothing. And if it's not S, it's probably some weird Latin name like Saliotius or something like that. I don't know Ulysses S. Grant's middle name, but if I had to guess, I would say it's just S, and it's not S period, it's just S because he needed a middle initial. That was the most common middle initial given if you didn't have a middle name. Same for Harry S. Truman. His middle name was just the letter S. It wasn't like some abbreviation. So let's move in. We are moving into 1869. Now, in 1869, we get an interesting change because we get the 15th Amendment. Now, why the 15th Amendment? And what does the 15th Amendment do? Well, when Grant takes over in 1869, one of the things that he knew a lot about was the amount of violence in the South, because he had been the commander of the Union Army, right? And he had seen a lot of this stuff firsthand. And he was aware of groups like the Knights of the White Camellia and the KKK. And he was really interested in stopping violence against black people and guaranteeing them the right to vote. Now, you would think that the 13th Amendment that got rid of slavery would mean that everybody was a citizen, but, there we go. It was a typo when he enrolled in the military. His name was Hiram Ulysses Grant. The name U.S. Grant, because there we go. Hiram Ulysses Grant, presidential term, mistaken benefactor, application form to West Point. Yeah, so the S doesn't stand for anything. Why was the middle initial so important? Just typical cultural thing in the United States. People tend to have first name, middle name, family name. It goes back to Latin naming schemes where you had praenomen and all that fun stuff, but it's just cultural. It doesn't necessarily, you don't have to have a middle name. Some people have more than one middle name, and that's like, I went to school with a guy that had 2 middle names. Anyway, so you would think that the 13th group means, or the 13th Amendment says you get voting rights or you get citizenship, but it clearly didn't. So they had to pass the 14th, which said everybody's a citizen. And you would think that meant that if you were a male of voting age, you would be guaranteed voting rights. But the South did not interpret it as such. So the 15th Amendment gets written to guarantee that if you are a man of voting age and a citizen, you get the right to vote. Now, the 15th is going to get picked up and passed pretty quickly. But this is not going to turn out the way that Grant really expected it to. Because what ends up happening when the particular black people in the South get to vote is that the radical Republicans who had been in Congress see this as an ultimate opportunity to guarantee their future forever. And they're going to go to the places in the South and try to convert all of these freed slaves into Republican voters. And Grant was hoping that what this would do is let individual groups of people make their own decisions and not necessarily turn Congress loose on them. But that is sort of more or less what happens. And by the time we get to 1870, what we see is the states of the South that are still holding out are going to end up more or less being cajoled back into the country because of economic issues, because of military oversight stuff, and because of the promise kind of getting back to some level of normalcy, right? So the 15th Amendment gets ratified by the states in 1870, and the last few states that are not part of the government get brought back in, like Mississippi, Texas, and Georgia. These are the last three kind of holdouts. So at this point, everybody is back into the country. But that doesn't mean that they're happy about it. Your brother's name is the combination of 4 first names. Not that it's different in Germany, actually. Probably not as emphasized, but some people like middle names here as well. Yeah, it's a thing. Oh, so you're from Germany. I've been to Germany. It's really pretty. I would like to explore more of Germany. Now, 1871 is a weird period of time. When all of the states get let back into the government, there is a surge in black voting and black representation in the government. And I actually have a little chart here that I can show you. All right. So I know that this is very, very small here, but let's look at this. Okay, so the 41st Congress right here is the first one where we have basically a reunified country. So the blue that we see are numbers of people that are in the House of Representatives that are people of color. And these little dots here are senators that are people of color. So when we get the country back together, they actually elect a senator and a couple of representatives that are black. And actually this circle right here represents the first black senator who's actually from Mississippi, of all places. A guy named Hiram Revels, the first black senator in United States history. This little circle right here is the second black senator who's also from Mississippi. So what you see here is that we're getting even representation from a lot of these southern states from black people that are going to Congress. But note what happens. They start getting representation, and then this right here happens. And then you don't see any more senators, and then you see fewer representatives, and then you see even fewer representatives, and then there's this. This giant blank space right here represents basically a decade where black people in America had rights to vote, but had literally no representation in the federal Congress because no one was running and no one was allowed to vote for them. Now, do we really think that black people in the South just decided, you know what, we don't want to run for office, and you know what, we're really not that interested in voting? Of course not. Of course not, because that is not what happened. What happened was voter suppression and organized anti-African American groups like the White League. So this is a pretty famous political campaign. What you see here is the White League, which was another group that was formed in Louisiana, and they're shaking hands with a guy that's the KKK, and you can see here that they have lynched this particular individual. They burned down a schoolhouse, and it says worse than slavery. And this says the lost cause. They both agree in this thing called the lost cause. The Union as it was. This is a white man's government, right? So what we get out of this particular political cartoon is the idea that the South had created this ideological, that this is very much anti-White League. The South had begun working on this ideological concept that the Confederate States of America were literally some sort of chosen by God government, and that the North had come down to destroy their way of life, and that it was the job and the cause of white people in the South to prevent black people from being able to participate in everyday life in the South. And this is in a response to Congress saying you have to give them rights. They're going to say, no, we don't, and no, we're not. And the violence that happens in 1870 and 1871 is going to hit a fever pitch. People are going to start attacking politicians. People are going to start killing anybody that tries to show up for voting rights. They're going to deny people access to just basic functions of life, right? You can't go to the store. This is a functional beginning of segregation if there wasn't one already. And Grant gets really, really sick of this, and he passes, or he works with Congress to pass something called the Enforcement Acts in 1871. And the Enforcement Acts are really important because this is actually going to be directly targeted at groups like the KKK. And it's going to say that the federal government had the ability to intervene to guarantee people things like voting rights. It guaranteed their ability to serve on juries, right? Let's not forget that when a person commits a crime, they're supposed to go in front of a jury of their peers. Well, in the South, if both lawyers are white, they're not going to select black members for juries. And if a black person is the defendant, do you think that in 1870 Mississippi or Alabama that any black person that is committing a crime is going to get a true jury of their peers? Absolutely not. So the Enforcement Act said that the federal government could step in to make that happen. They could also step in to ensure that people could run for office. So if you were going to try to run for state senate, or you're going to try to run for governor of a city, and you were being intimidated, you could apply for federal assistance. And this is going to specifically target, dun dun dun, it's going to target adventure. Unfortunate. Jinun, thank you so much for that follow, and welcome to the adventure. All right, so the Enforcement Act is going to target a lot of KKK activities. So if you were doing voter intimidation, that is now listed as a federal crime. If you are trying to harass people from running for office, that is now considered a federal crime. A lot of this stuff that they were able to do targeted the violence that the KKK groups and the White Leagues and other things like that were doing to promote what the South considered the right way to do things, which was, of course, super racist and white supremacist, right? This is going to target Dr. Jones. Now, I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. 767. Thank you so much for that subscription. 7 months. My friend, thank you. I appreciate it. I hope you're having a good one. It's good to see you. Thanks you. Very much appreciated. All right. So, everybody is like pretty much on board with Grant. And now Grant does something that a lot of people don't really like. And this happens in 1872. 1872, Grant is going to work with, believe it or not, some people in Congress to pass something called the Confederate Amnesty Bill. And what this does is lifts the ban on most people that had fought in the Confederacy from holding office. So most people, unless you were like really high up in the chain of command, or if you were really involved in the government, most other people now can run for office. And a lot of people ask, why do you even do that? Well, to a certain extent, the freedom with which Johnson had distributed pardons had already hit most of the really big, powerful people. that were going to ask for, ways back in. So the number of people that were excluded from the amnesty bill that would have been super duper problematic was fairly small. And Grant recognized that a lot of these people wanted to sort of move forward. And some people that had been in the Confederate Army had re-signed up and rejoined into the government, the Union Army, right? The larger United States Federal Army. So should those people still be barred? And there's a bit of a back and forth, but if effectively the amnesty bill here is not going to hurt Grant, it's actually going to get him a lot of support. And when he goes up for re-election in 72, he gets elected with a much higher percentage of the vote. He had sort of squeaked by. If you look at just the electoral vote in his first vote, it looks like he cleaned the clock of his opponent. But he only won by about 300,000 votes nationally. His second term, it's a lot more substantial. But when he gets into his second term, the tide starts shifting, right? When the South starts clamping down on who gets to vote, they're going to start electing more people that line up with their ideology. And in 1874, the House of Representatives is actually going to go Democratic. And this is the first time that they had been Democratic in a long time. And when this happens, Grant, doesn't have universal support anymore. He's got to now start working on things. And a lot of this also had to do with the fact that the economic downfall of the South had started becoming much more prevalent and evident. When all of these states joined back up and they had to, kind of reintegrate, their economies are going to flatline because they are no longer set up to, exist at the same level of economic operation because they lost slavery. Right, Mississippi used to be one of the either the second or third richest state in the Union, and then after they got out from under Reconstruction, or they were allowed to rejoin the Union, they went down to the lowest. They were the poorest state in the Union, and they still are one of the poorest states in the country. So the economic system, in especially the South, was really bad off. And the way that Southerners are going to express this is by making certain that they are only going to elect people that line up with their ideology. And even though the KKK had sort of been targeted and sort of contained, that doesn't mean that there aren't other groups. The White League is out there, and there's another group that starts up around this time right here that we can see. These are red shirts. So red shirts were poll watchers. They would go to where you were voting, and they would stand outside all wearing their very red shirts here, and they would just make sure that the people that were voting were voting the right way, right? They wanted to make sure that the right people were getting access to votes. And you know exactly what this is. We know exactly what this is. This is voter intimidation under a new name. But because they weren't showing up in, white hoods like the KKK, they were sort of looked over. And because the South had decided that, no black people were going to get to vote and no black people were going to get to run for office, the government at the time looks the other direction. So if you were, trying to be harassed in the South, you had federal recourse. You could apply for government relief under things like the Enforcement Act, but that wasn't instantaneous, right? They didn't have telephones. You couldn't just call somebody in Washington and say, hey, man, they're trying to beat the crap out of me today when I went to go vote. All of this stuff is sort of being handled ex post facto, which is not the way that you get change to occur, right? Did they have high mortality rate on away missions? I'm not 100% sure exactly what that means, Moose. I'm sorry. Do we know what it was that caused them to go from one of the richest to one of the poorest? Yeah, so prior to the collapse of prior to the Civil War, Mississippi was one of the largest cotton exporters on earth. And it was one of the richest states in the Union because it produced massive amounts of cotton, which was the cash crop at the time. And it was able to do that because it was a slave state. And in Mississippi, by the time you get to 1860, right, when the war starts, there were more slaves in Mississippi than there were free people in Mississippi. The population was somewhere between like 50 and 55% slave. And when all of those people became free citizens, the landowners were no longer able to run their plantations at the same rate because, nobody could pay enough to make the same amounts of profit. Also, during the Civil War, because of the larger shortage of cotton, places like England and Spain and France had started looking for alternatives to buying cotton from the South. And they started growing cotton in India. They started growing cotton they started buying more cotton from places like Egypt. So the international market had fluctuated in such a way that cotton prices overall had decreased. So even coming out of the backside of the Civil War, cotton was not going to make them as much money. So it was more labor intensive and it was more cost intensive economically for them to grow cotton, and they were making less money on it on the back end. Also, the people in Mississippi did not take well to Reconstruction, and Reconstruction did not take well to them. It was pretty bad. Did they have high mortality rates? Red shirts. The loss of the pronoun and the timing there was important. So if you had said, did red shirts have high mortality rates on away missions, that I would have picked up with. Poll watchers, P-O-L-L. P-O-L-L. Yes, no to poll watching. Thank you, Magnificent. It's also good to see you. I know about the red shirt joke, but it was the loss of the antecedent for they in that particular. We all thought about it. Trekkie's nerd. I mean, I knew the joke. I just didn't. It was the timing that was off. Twitch delay is something I only think about while streaming and not while watching. There we go. Okay. Now that we're back on Goofy track. All these are good questions, by the way. So, in the 1874 elections, things are going to go to the sides of the Democrats. But remember that there's a period of time between the elections in 74 and when Congress gets seated in 75, right? So you get elections in November, and then usually in January, you get switchover, or February, or you get switchover, right? So there's that period of time that's called lame duck session. And in the lame duck session of 1875, the Republicans put together one more big bill that they get through sort of right at the squeaky deadline. And this is the anti-segregation civil rights bill passed in 1875. Now, this is a pretty important, interesting bill, and it basically says that public places and public services cannot be segregated. And you're like, wait, no segregation? Yeah, so 1875, no public places and no public buildings or services can be segregated. And you're like, well, didn't we have segregation? Yeah, because in 1883, Congress is going to, the Supreme Court is going to overrule that with a case that's called Plessy versus Ferguson, which says that it's okay to segregate if it is separate but equal. So for a brief period of time, people are like, oh, well, this is the end of Reconstruction, right? Because in 1875, segregation is, done. And they can't have any more segregation. But then people are like, but in 1883, it comes back because SCOTUS strikes down this decision in 1883. So it's 1883 that is the end of segregation. End of Reconstruction. So you get how there's ideological differences on this timing stuff. But the big stuff is in 1876. And this is where things go the most weird and the most sideways of them all. Because we have a presidential election. Grant decides that he's not going to run for a third term. So we have the election of 1876. And this one is what many people think to be the most corrupt presidential election in history. Here's what happens. There are two people running. One candidate is Hayes. He's a Republican. Another candidate named Tilden, who is a Democrat, is running. Schizo Tool. Thank you so much for that follow, and welcome to the adventure. All right. So, we've got an election. Now, right out the bat, if we look at northern state tallies, it looks right off the bat like Tilden wins the election. Now, there are a few states, notably all states that are in the South, that say, well, we don't know who won. Some people on the Democratic side say Tilden won our state. And some people on the Republican side say, no, Hayes won our state. And whoever gets these electoral votes is going to win the presidency. So Tilden looks like he should have won, and Hayes is sort of behind. But both sides sort of initially refuse to back down. And at this point, the Republicans had lost a lot, right? They had lost control of Congress. They expected that they were going to potentially lose control of the presidency. And the Democrats had Congress and had a lot of leverage because it looked like Tilden should have won. And then comes the back dealing. Leadership from both parties and from a lot of people that were already in the government sit down in kind of a secret meeting and they hammer out a deal. And the deal goes something like this. The Democrats were going to be willing to to relinquish Tilden's claim on the presidency and these electoral votes from these states in the South, and they're going to let Hayes win. But there are going to be requirements for that. First off, if Hayes is going to be president, you got to get all of the remaining troops out of the South. No more military rule in the South. Also, all of these radical Reconstruction bills, you got to get rid of them. And this is sort of the corrupt backdoor dealing that ends us up with President Rutherford B. Hayes, who looks like the creepy old guy from Home Alone, and every time I see him, that's the only thing that I can see. Yeah, so much for democracy. Everybody wins except for the people, right? He was a nice man and saved Kevin. I didn't say he wasn't nice. I just said that he was creepy. Everybody knows that the salt that he has is the bodies of the dead people that he's killed, right? I'm just joking. That's the whole kind of heart moment of that movie. Keep the change, you filthy animal. Anyway, so in 1876, we get the end of military occupation of the South, and we get the end of a lot of the Reconstruction Acts. But that doesn't mean that the South is magically hunky-dory with the fact that there are free citizens of color in their regions. So when does when does Reconstruction actually end? Is it in 76? A lot of people say yes, it's in 76. But a lot of people say, nope, Reconstruction continues because in 1883 they reinstate segregation. And that's federal, it ends in 1883 because it gets federal power out of the South, because federal power was saying you can't segregate because of the Civil Rights Bill passed in 75. So in 1883, when the Civil Rights Bill of 75 gets revoked, some people go, that's the end of Reconstruction, because then the South can fully operate how it wants to, aka segregate. Other people say it's in 1890. In 1890, there was another package of bills that was attempted to push through that would basically eliminate things like poll taxes and reading requirements for voting, which eventually goes on to become an amendment of the Constitution. And people go, that's the end of Reconstruction. But the whole point that we've been talking about for like the last 2.5 hours or 2 hours and 42 minutes is that there is a lot of stuff happening in this period of time. And there are truths that we have to accept. Slavery is horrible. Equality is clearly the right way. Clearly. For a country to be a democratic republic like the United States is, you've got to be willing to treat people equally. That is just the basis of fact, right? These are truths. The South was not equal, and it wasn't equal during Reconstruction, and it wasn't equal after Reconstruction or before Reconstruction. Was it more equal? Maybe on paper, a little bit in practice, but were there people that were inside of the Reconstruction movement that were actively attempting to punish the South? Yes, there were. Were there people that were actively trying to make money off of the collapse of the South? Yes, there were. Were there people that were trying to use racist tactics from Washington, D.C. in order to co-opt black votes in the South so that they remained in political power? Yes, there was. Was racism a problem in just the South? No. Were there racist people in the North? Absolutely. If there weren't racist people, why did this stuff happen the way that it did, right? This is a messy situation. And so much of what happens during this time is going to be the beginning of a domino chain that stretches all the way up through today, right? There are still people today in the South that think that the Confederacy was some sort of glorious high watermark of human governmental achievement, that still thinks that the North was evil for destroying the Southern way of life. There are still people in the North, there are still people in the country today that think that nobody in the North had any racist bones in their body, that like everybody in the North just loved black people and was just trying to fight the entire war to save black people's lives. That was not the case. There were, and I know I'm trying to make some sort of larger case for a deeper understanding of this, but let's just be real. People in 1860 and 1870 aren't physiologically or ideologically too terribly different than they are right now, right? there are probably a majority of people in the United States that are not what I would call active racists. There are a lot of people that aren't active racists that still don't realize that they have racist actions, right? There are people that don't think that, having their little reactions to things and situations is actually based on racist ideology. And there are people that think that, all of this was so cut and dry, like everybody was good and everybody was bad. And there weren't goods and bads, and there weren't shades of gray, and there weren't nuance or anything like that. It's a crazy situation, and it's a very complicated time. And that's why I spent almost 3 hours talking about it, because you can't really just skim over this stuff. You have to explain how it developed and how it went from one point to another, because if you don't, you end up with some biased interpretation of the situation, right? The Electoral College system seems to an outsider to undermine the fundamental principles of democracy, given that it diminishes the equality of votes. Or have you misunderstood how it works? Magnificent. The very basic beginnings of the Electoral College system were included in the Constitution in order to make certain that the voices of people in states with small populations were not immediately overruled by the voices of people in big states, right? Because in the original 13 colonies, there were some very, very, very small states that had very, very small populations, like Delaware. It was a very, very small state. And then you had states like Virginia, who had a massive population. And what people were afraid of is if you do just a pure democratic one for one vote counts as one vote situation, what you would end up with is something that they feared called a favored son, right? I am the favored son of Virginia, S-O-N, right? And I am from Virginia, therefore I'm going to get all of the votes from Virginia. And because Virginia has a gigantic population, that is going to overrule the votes of everybody in Massachusetts and Connecticut and Maine and Delaware, and probably, tip the balance because of one state's decision, right? They were trying to create a balance of power where one state did not decide the entire decision, right? So like right now, it's a really chaotic system because everybody thinks like, oh, if you win California, it's got 53 electoral votes. Clearly you're going to win the presidency. But you don't have to win California. You don't have to win California or New York to win the presidency. But those people, those states have massive populations, right? So it's an attempt at creating a more equitable situation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it creates a purely equitable situation. If only this was taught in schools. Well, Tuna, if you ever had your kid sitting in my history class, it was taught in schools. Indeed, context matters. Absolutely, Beppo. Absolutely. Nothing happens in a vacuum. That is true. I guess they never watched or internationalized Gundam, huh? There were varying levels of good and evil everywhere, right? New types are humans. They're just evolved humans, and they have to have representation, right? Yesterday, a Russian student asked me why Westerners refer to white people as causations, or is that supposed to be Caucasians? That led to a kind of uncomfortable explanation of racist history of mankind. Yeah, I mean, it happens. So the Electoral College system is designed to try and overcome the cynicism of politicians chasing more votes rather than doing what is right. Oh, so that's a hot take. It's only for president. And ideologically, if you look at the way that a lot of the founders of the United States thought about the average voter, a lot of them did not have very high opinions of the average voter. Jefferson specifically was a big Federalist supporter and was kind of afraid of what would happen if you got stupid people in large groups. And he was a big fan of kind of creating stopgap mechanisms that would keep stupid people in large groups from making political decisions that would affect the entire country. But let us remember that when the Constitution was written in 1787, the country was vastly different than it is right now. Vastly different. Incredibly different. And while the Constitution is a very malleable and fluid document that has that ambiguity built into it on purpose, it's almost impossible to suggest that that the original founders thought that we would not have changed the Constitution. If you look at the number of amendments to the United States Constitution, it's a constant line that goes downhill, right? We haven't... if you look at the early people that were in the first or second generation, they understood that the process of amending the Constitution was put into the Constitution so that you could fix stuff when it changed and when it happened. And we have stopped doing that. Instead, we have shifted a lot of responsibility onto the Supreme Court to interpret law instead of interpreting constitutionality. And we've shifted a lot of that from Congress to the executive departments, like the Department of Education, Department of Energy, where Congress doesn't have to pass a law anymore. They can just say, oh, well, that's the Department of Justice job. You go handle that. Our government today does not function in the way that the founders would have appreciated it. Stupid people in large groups do tend to go together. They do. Demagoguery for the win. Right, so that's what they were trying to get away from. They were trying to prevent demagoguery. You have no idea why people are referred to as Caucasian. A larger concept that everybody from a particular region in Central Asia is white because of mostly 1800s Orientalism trying to create ties between the original Indo-Europeans, from which our language derived from, and white people, because people in Europe and America wanted to create a historical basis for white people being in charge of everything and sort of being in the driver's seat, going as far back in history as possible. And that mostly came out of, again, this 1800s concept of, we're going to standardize everything. We're going to put people in hierarchies of races, and oh crap, we got to put white people on top, so now we have to explain why. So we're going to go back in history for it. It's super full of racism. But at that point, I have officially finished what I wanted to talk about. So if anybody else has any questions about this material or any other history-related material, now is the time to ask. Also, if you want to redeem any channel points or anything, now is the time, because otherwise it's about time for us to go do a raid. Now I'm going to go see who is around so that we can do a raid. Let's see who's around. You know what? I think I know where we're going to go. Did the non-KKK groups eventually fold into the KKK, or what? Is that a whole stream? It's not a whole stream. In certain situations, yes. Like the Knights of the White Camellia sort of dried up and blew away, mostly because the Democrats took back over and they didn't necessarily need a specific hate group to run everything anymore on the high levels of politics. The White Leagues hung around for quite some time, but the KKK itself has risen and fallen pretty substantially in a few different waves. So by the time we get to the mid and late 1870s, the KKK is still around, but it's effectively like dormant. Because, again, and this sounds so horrible, but it's just the truth, the process had delivered its desired goal. Black people were being segregated, black people were being kept out of voting, black people were being kept out of running for office. So the need to have that around again really wasn't necessarily as effective. And especially after the military occupation of the South ended, the need to have a KKK armed group running around killing people and intimidating people was significantly lowered. And a lot of people were just like, okay, we did our job. White people have taken back over the South. We don't need the KKK anymore. And then you see it show back up again in the 1920s, and then you see it show back up again, especially around the civil rights movement in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So it's been up and down. And the KKK that's around today is actually an amalgam of a lot of other groups and is not really completely the same as the original KKK. But yeah, the KKK itself is a really big topic that could be particularly big. Any vote for topics, or has that been purchased? This was a special stream specifically for Brittany. This was her birthday stream, so we have a topic for the next viewer request stream, which is the Swedish Empire. We'll be doing that one next Tuesday because somebody forgot to water them. The KKK is a TOS minefield. So the white camellia dried up because somebody forgot to water it, and good, because they were horrible people. Trying to discuss the KKK is a topic that could happen, but that would be really hard. I'd have to be very, very careful there. All right. Other questions or comments or anything like that? Okie dokie. Well, thank you, everybody. This stream was pretty long. It's about an hour longer than normal, but when you talk about a topic like this, it's not one that you, like I said, you just skim over. You have to talk about all of it. So there we go. We are going to go raid. Since we got raided by one of the founders of the Knowledge Fellowship, it is only fitting that we go raid another founder of the Knowledge Fellowship. So we're going to go raid Rocket Sage. Rocket Sage is a geologist who is currently... You're very welcome. I hope that you enjoyed it, and we'll, I'm sure, talk about this more as we go on. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for all of the new follows. So many new follows. 767, thanks again for that subscription. Steve Conley, if you're still around, thank you for the raid. Dr. WD40, if you're still around, thank you so much for that raid. Nix Lottle, thank you so much for that raid. I appreciate everybody hanging out. If you haven't already, hit that follow button and come back for next time. We do this stuff usually once or twice a week, and I hope that you understand that I try to look at these things fairly and in what I would consider an even-handed and unbiased viewpoint. Of course, I'm only a human. You're welcome to correct me if I screw some stuff up. But anyway, thanks for everybody for hanging out. And yeah, I will definitely see everybody on Thursday, 1900 Central Standard Time. We'll be talking about Korea and the unification of Korea. But we're going to go see Sage. Our battle cry is adventure. And you can put, all caps or exclamations or whatever. And if you do have those lovely adventure hat emotes, throw those in the chat too. Thanks so much, everybody. Hope you have a good one. Until Thursday. Stealth mode lock. Dun 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 dun. Thank you, stealth mode. Take it easy, everybody.